Have you ever walked into a place that promised light, but left feeling darker than before? Have you ever felt like you didn't fit, even in the one place that claimed you would finally belong? Maybe it happened in the middle of a prayer. Maybe it happened in the silence after a sermon. Maybe it happened when no one noticed your pain. Or worse, when they did, but chose to ignore it. You felt something, a presence, a shift, a subtle but undeniable awakening. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't pride. It was something much deeper, like a divine calling echoing through your chest. You didn't leave God. You left a system, a structure, a program. And ever since then, you've carried the weight of a question that no one around you could answer. If I still love God, why do I feel so rejected by His people? If this resonates with you, it's not random. You didn't find this video by accident. Something brought you here. Some frequency, some alignment. This message is for the silent ones, the seekers, the awakened, the ones who feel too much, think too deeply, and ask questions that churches don't like to answer. And if you're still watching, maybe it's because you're not just curious. Maybe it's because you've already been hearing the whispers too. Whispers in your dreams, whispers in numbers and symbols, whispers in the way certain people suddenly leave your life, and others, just as suddenly, arrive. You've noticed, haven't you? The clock striking 11:11. The feeling that you're being watched, but not by anything human. The sense that you were meant for something more, but whenever you try to speak it aloud, you get shut down. You're overthinking. Just have faith. Stop questioning God. But your soul doesn't listen to silence anymore. Your spirit refuses to be contained in man-made walls. You are not broken. You are not backsliding. You are not possessed or misled. You are chosen. And the truth is, many of the chosen ones are leaving the church, not because they've lost their faith, but because they've outgrown the cage that tried to hold it. This isn't about abandoning God. This is about finally meeting Him, without someone else standing in the way, without a program, without performance, without shame. This video is not just another voice. It's a portal, and once you hear what I'm about to share, you won't be able to unhear it. Because what's really happening behind the scenes is much bigger than religion. This is a shift in consciousness, a quantum shift in human spiritual evolution, and those who feel it, the real ones, can never go back to sleep. So stay with me, because in the next moments, we're going deep, deeper than dogma, deeper than doctrine. We're going into the core of why the awakened ones, the true chosen ones, are walking out of the church and into something far more powerful. And if you feel that tingle in your chest, that rush of energy in your spine right now, don't ignore it. It's confirmation. You're not crazy. You're not alone. You're right on time. This message isn't popular, but it's real. And you're about to understand why this silence is becoming a movement, and why you were never meant to stay inside the system. Let's begin. Before we dive in, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. I am the chosen one. If you've ever felt this calling, it tells YouTube that this awakened community is real, and it helps the algorithm push this message to those who need it most. They say you're born like everyone else, but deep down, you always knew that wasn't true for you. Maybe it started early. Those moments as a child when you felt out of place, misunderstood, or like the world around you wasn't really yours. You noticed things others ignored. You felt emotions more deeply. You saw patterns, numbers, synchronicities, like seeing 11:11 over and over again, as if the universe itself was trying to get your attention. These weren't coincidences. They were confirmations. They were part of the spiritual calling, something invisible but undeniably present, quietly guiding your steps, even when you had no words to explain it. And so, naturally, you gravitated toward God. You sought meaning. And where did they tell you to go? The church, the house of God, the place where you were promised acceptance, love, guidance. But for many chosen ones, that place didn't feel like home. It felt like a performance. It felt like rules with no spirit, community with no true connection. And when you started to change, when your awakening began to unfold, that's when the real shift happened. You asked deeper questions. You felt uncomfortable sitting through services that felt more like repetition than revelation. You began to see, and the moment you did, the people around you changed. They looked at you differently. They whispered, "He's changing. She's questioning too much. Something's off." And little by little, without saying it out loud, they pushed you to the edges. Until you weren't just sitting in the back row. You were walking out the back door. And what did they say when you left? He left the church. She's lost. But here's the truth they won't speak aloud. You didn't leave God. You left the system. You left the noise. You left what no longer matched your frequency. That's the reality of spiritual awakening. It begins quietly, like a whisper. But soon, it becomes a roar inside your chest that you can't ignore. It tells you, you're not crazy, you're chosen. And the further you walk away from what confined your spirit, the more clearly you begin to hear the voice of the divine, not through a pulpit, not through a program, but within yourself. That's the sacred journey most don't understand. It's why the chosen ones leave the church, but never God. You're not rebelling. You're returning to your true path, your soul path, your awakened life. And yes, it hurts when people judge what they don't understand. It hurts when you're cast out by the very people you thought would stand beside you. But that pain, it's part of the shift, the shedding, the signal that you've outgrown what once felt like home. You didn't change. You aligned. And that's something the system can't hold. So if you've felt this, if you've lived this exact moment, when you knew you had to walk away to remain true to your soul, drop a comment below with the age you first felt the calling. Let's show others they're not alone. You still loved God. That was never the issue. Your faith didn't fade, it deepened. But the deeper it got, the more you began to realize that the church walls weren't expanding with you. They were closing in. What once felt sacred started to feel staged, repetitive. Like everyone was playing a part in a script written generations ago. You sat there listening, week after week, wondering why your spirit felt more restless after every sermon. The words were familiar, the rituals unchanged, but something inside of you had shifted. You weren't just attending, you were awakening. And awakening doesn't fit neatly inside doctrine. At first you tried to stay. You wanted it to work. You showed up, smiled, nodded, prayed, but your soul was suffocating. You weren't rejecting God. You were rejecting a version of him that felt too small, too manipulated, too distant from the real divine you'd started to experience in quiet moments, in nature, in deep conversations, in the space between words. That's where the real God was showing up, not behind a pulpit, not inside rehearsed prayers, but in the freedom you felt when you stopped trying to fit in. People noticed, of course. They always do. You don't come around anymore. You're slipping. You need to come back to church. But what they couldn't understand is that you never left your faith. You left the box it was being shoved into. You chose freedom in Christ over fear and tradition. You chose spirit over system. And that choice wasn't rebellion. It was reverence. Because the truth is, faith and religion aren't always the same thing. One is a living connection to the Creator. The other can become a performance, a culture, a cage dressed up as community. And maybe the hardest part was explaining it to people who'd never felt what you were feeling. How could you explain that sitting in a pew made you feel more distant from God than walking alone under the stars? How could you tell them that his voice was louder when no one else was talking? You couldn't. So you walked away, not in anger, but in clarity. And as you stepped out, something happened. You started to feel light, not just metaphorically, literally. It was like a golden presence walked with you. You weren't ashamed. You weren't broken. You were becoming. That's the real journey. When you leave the institution but not the intimacy. When you let go of tradition to find truth, not someone else's truth, but your own sacred path with God. And if you've felt this, if you're in the middle of this exact process, drop a comment below and write freedom. Let this be a place where others know they're not crazy, not alone, and not faithless. They're just finding a new way to believe. And as you walk further from what once confined you, something begins to call you forward, something deeper, older, more powerful than anything you've ever been taught. You begin to sense that this isn't just about you. It's about remembering who you've always been. When you finally walked away from what no longer aligned with your spirit, you weren't abandoning your path. You were stepping into it. That breaking point wasn't failure. It was transformation. You weren't losing your faith. You were waking up inside it. What most people saw as your rebellion was, in truth, your revelation. And this is where the true journey begins. Because the moment you let go of the need to belong to the institution, you began to hear the voice of something higher, louder, purer, and strangely familiar. At first it shows up in subtle ways. a name you keep hearing, a symbol that follows you, on clocks, license plates, dreams, a sensation that someone or something is guiding you, even when you're completely alone. You feel chills without wind. You sense presence in the room when no one is there. And slowly you start to understand. You are being led. The signs were never random. The numbers, the synchronicities, the dreams you couldn't shake, they're all part of your spiritual awakening. And the more you lean in, the clearer it becomes. You're not just leaving something behind. You're stepping into a new covenant, a divine agreement between your soul and the source that created you. This isn't religion. This isn't doctrine. This is sacred remembrance. You begin to realize that what you were looking for in the church was never behind stained glass. It was encoded inside you, waiting to be activated, waiting for this very moment. The dreams become more vivid, the messages more direct. You start meeting people on the same frequency, strangers who feel like family, conversations that feel like lifetimes. And inside all of this, you start remembering who you really are, not who they told you to be, not what the system shaped you into, but who you were before the world made you forget. This is what it means to be chosen, not perfect, not superior, just aware. Aware that the life you were handed isn't the life you were called to live, and it's in that awareness that something powerful awakens in you. A light, a calling, a mission. You feel pulled, not to return to the old ways, but to walk forward with sacred responsibility. You begin to live with intention, with frequency. You understand that this spiritual awakening is not just about escaping a system. It's about embodying the divine, becoming the bridge between heaven and earth. The signs were always there. You just weren't ready to see them. But now you can't unsee. Now you can't unfeel. You realize the people who pushed you out were actually redirecting you to something far greater. They didn't exile you. They freed you. Because if they hadn't closed the door, you never would have opened the gate to your destiny. This new journey is sacred. It's personal. It's mystical. But it's real. And now that you've stepped into it, you'll begin to see what most are too blind or too afraid to look for. And in just a moment, we're going to uncover the part no one ever talks about. The part that explains why this expulsion was never punishment, it was prophecy. And if you've made it this far, you were meant to hear what comes next. And then, something clicks inside you. It's not shame. It's not confusion. It's clarity. For the first time, you realize this wasn't a fall. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't exile. This was a calling, a sacred invitation. The rejection you felt, it wasn't meant to break you. It was meant to redirect you. Because the truth is, if the door of the institution hadn't shut, you would have never walked through the gate of your divine path. You would have stayed comfortable, safe, programmed. But you weren't born for safe. You were born to awaken. And now you can feel it in every part of your being. You don't belong in boxes built by men. You don't need validation from titles, stages, or traditions that drain your spirit. You were never meant to serve a program. You were meant to serve a purpose. And that purpose is unfolding right now, not tomorrow, not next year, now. In this very breath, your soul is remembering who it is and why it came. That's why this feels so familiar. Because this was always meant to happen. This was written into you before time even began. So while others might say, you've changed, you know the truth. You've returned to your essence, to your alignment, to the divine frequency that was always waiting for you to find it again. And that frequency? It doesn't live in one building. It's not confined to one denomination. It's not limited by man-made dogmas. It exists wherever two or more are gathered in truth, in light, in remembrance. That's what this space is. This isn't just a video. This isn't just a voice. This is a frequency, a portal, a gathering of those who've been hearing the call but had no name for it. Until now. Here, you're not crazy, you're not lost. You're not too much or too deep or too far gone. Here, you're home. Because the chosen ones are never alone. They're just spread out, hidden in plain sight, until it's time to rise together. And if your heart is still beating a little faster than normal, if you feel that undeniable pull in your chest, that's not emotion, that's energy. That's your DNA responding to truth. That's resonance. That's confirmation. That's God. You didn't stumble into this. You were guided. Every second of confusion, every tear, every spiritual question, they all led you here. And now you get to decide. Do you go back to what's familiar, Or do you step fully into what's destined because something sacred is calling you forward? Something your soul has known all along, but the world made you forget. And as we prepare to go deeper, we're stepping into the beginning of everything. You've seen the signs as an adult. But what if this started long before you could even speak? What if the signs were there in your childhood? In the next video, we'll reveal the hidden clues, the overlooked moments, the supernatural fingerprints that prove you were chosen from the very beginning. The title is Chosen Ones, Signs from Childhood that reveal you were marked from the start. And if that even sounds familiar to you, you already know you can't miss it. Now, if this message stirred something inside of you, here's what I want you to do right now. Like this video, share it with someone who's been walking this same invisible path, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a single drop of what's coming. And if you made it this far, leave a comment that simply says, "I chose the light," because that one phrase lets YouTube know this community is real, and it brings this message to others who are still searching in silence. Stay close. Watch the next video that's already waiting for you. And remember this, you were never alone, not for a single second.